I'm Vicente. Address. I'm Vicente Khalil, the Executive Director of United to End Homelessness, which is a key initiative of Orange County United Way, and I'm also a Continuum of Care board member. We are so grateful to be here today with those joining us in the studio and with everybody who is streaming online. Your presence helps support our shared efforts to advance housing solutions so that everybody in Orange County has a safe and affordable place to call home. Last month, many of us joined together at the Orange County Soccer Club for the Person in Front of You event, where we gathered to acknowledge the great needs of our community, of people who are living on the edge, the 359,000 people who are experiencing food insecurity and who are struggling financially, and the 17,145 people who lost their housing and fell into homelessness. A reminder of how important this work is. Today, we're going to hear from county leaders as they reflect on the last year and share their vision and hopes for the future. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions in advance. That really helped shape our program today. I am honored to be joined today by Vice Chair Katrina Foley, Supervisor Vicente Sarmiento, Doug Becht, Nishta Mahendra, and Robert Santa Bob Morse, who is missing his beard.
Yeah.
So for introductions, I would love to come to each of you to take a moment to briefly explain your role as it's connected to addressing homelessness. And then I'd like to ask you for 1 to 3 words to describe 2025. And we're just going to go down the line. So Doug, you get to go first.
Sure. So thank you, everyone. My name is Doug Becht. I'm the Director of the Office of Care Coordination. The Office of Care Coordination is located in the county's executive office. And we play the primary role at the county in coordinating the address and approach that the county has towards addressing homelessness. But we're also the administrative entity or the staff of the Orange County Continuum of Care as well. And then in 1 to 3 words, I think for 2025, I think of changing landscape.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Vicente Sarmiento, Orange County Supervisor for the 2nd District, which encompasses the entire city of Santana, parts of Orange, Anaheim, Tustin, Garden Grove. So it is the central part of our beautiful county. And I am currently the chair of the Commission to Address Homelessness. I will be leading. Somebody else will be backfilling me, but we've got a good person as a vice chair who will be taking up that role, in Gina. But I'm also the incoming chair at CalOp, which is a partner here in trying to address this critical problem. So as Doug was mentioning, I think for those of us on the board and for my role as the outgoing chair of the commission, it has been to really try to marshal our resources and make sure that we address long-term solutions, but also have some immediate strategies to many of our families who just can't afford to live, in our county. That's just getting difficult. It's getting less affordable. Rents continue to go up. Salaries continue to stay stagnant. So that is not a good formula for people to live in a county that's as beautiful, as attractive to people to come and work here. And it hurts us all when we see people leave our county to other places. So that's something that we're trying to work on here. But I do want to thank all the providers that we've worked with, the partners, those of you who leaned in and helped us try to achieve a more affordable, a better place to live for all of us, because we know everybody deserves to enjoy what our county has.
I'm Katrina Foley. I'm the Vice Chair for the Orange County Board of Supervisors, and I represent the fabulous 5th District. Welcome to the 5th District, home of PBS SoCal. Also, the 5th District covers Costa Mesa, where I live, where I was the mayor, where we built a homeless shelter in partnership with many of you, including Santa Bob here, all the way down to San Clemente. We have 31 miles of coast. And while it is a very wealthy community, it also has pockets of extreme poverty. And also a workforce housing dilemma where we have major employers, hospitals, universities, government, and no place for people to be able to afford to live. So I also serve as the chair of the Orange County Housing Finance Trust. And in that role, I feel like my job is to try to raise capital into the trust so that we can bridge the gap and close the gap for housing developers, affordable housing developers, and make sure that we're collaborating with these two guys to my left and all of you to build more housing.
Well, good
Afternoon.
made it. Okay. One thing right. My name is Nishtha Mohindra, and I have the honor of currently serving as the vice chair for a continuum of care board. Our role effectively, and I'm joined by two other board members on this panel, which I would be remiss if I didn't mention. Sana Bob and Bex both serve on the board with me. I get to learn from them and the other players on there. Last year has been busy. Our primary role as a board is to provide the strategic oversight to the homeless response system in Orange County. And we do that in partnership with Doug and his office and his team. 3 words that define 2025: advocacy, change management, and resiliency.
Okay, we were bad. We forgot our 3 words.
These are your supervisors.
So mine are short, right? So
Okay.
what comes to me is, and we can have many adjectives, but mine is chaos, hostility, and ruthlessness. So that has been a very, very, sorry on that positive note. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, mine is innovation, workforce, and urgency. We have an urgency.
Thank you. Okay.
Hello, everybody. I am Santa Bob. Ignore any other names. I am Santa Bob. I am first and foremost a homeless advocate. I serve on the Commission to Address Homelessness. Have you heard, I'm also a Continuum of Care board member. I am the chair of the Lived Experience Advisory Committee. And my job is to take my lived experience and make suggestions, demands, and urge all policies to be especially supporting the homeless with dignity. And as far as the year goes, let's go with the PG version. All falls up.
Thank you, everybody. And from those words, it is very clear 2025 was a difficult year. And so I would love to just begin our conversation today by hearing from our elected officials' perspective. Where do you feel we've had to pivot as a community in our approaches to addressing homelessness in the last year? And Vice Chair Foley, I'd love to hear from you, in particular with the Housing Finance Trust. How have you had to pivot?
Yeah, thank you. So 2025, I would say we didn't have to pivot in 2025. That's coming in 2026. So the time is now to pivot, because 2025 is when we found out that, voucher programs are going to be cut, that 1,200 families are going to lose their housing, that we're going to see our emergency housing vouchers cut, that we are going to see federal funding that we had relied on as gap funding for some of our affordable housing developments cut, where Costa Mesa Senior Center housing that we had worked on for 7 years that finally got approved. We're looking at, I think it's 1.6 million in cuts. 2025 is when we learned of what we needed to pivot to in 2026. And what are we doing? Well, we've kind of reorganized for the Housing Finance Trust. We had a great strategic planning session. We've added a capital campaign to our programming. So we are going to be partnering with private entities to bring private dollars into the Housing Finance Trust. It was envisioned to be a collaboration between government and the private entities to build a funding source for gap funding. We never got the private dollars in. And so that's what my priority is and the board's priority for the year, so that we can do more for the whole continuum.
That's great. Thank you. Supervisor
Yeah,
Sarmiento?
and I just want to, kind of backfill what the vice chair said. I also serve on the Orange County Housing Finance Trust, so it is a place where we can make sure good developments are realized. Because obviously, for us to be able to address and try to solve this problem of homelessness, it is creating more inventory of housing units. So to the extent that we can use that opportunity and some gap funding to make sure they realize it's very important. What I think, going into 26, what's been challenging is in 25, there are things that we didn't see before. At least my time as a council member since I've been serving, in public office. I started in 2007 in Santana, then as mayor of the city in 2020, and now on the board since 2022. What we haven't seen is the uncertainty, the unpredictability that we're seeing now. So it really is making it difficult, not just on funds that we thought were going to be available just on a consistent basis, but things like Supreme Court decisions, like the grants pass. In my opinion, and I think one of the things I do agree with the vice chair on that. I know we've had some really robust discussions because we care about people who are unhoused. We know that there is a criminal element to people who are within the homelessness population who prey on folks who are going through trauma, whether it's mental health or substance abuse. So we certainly want to address those, but we don't want to criminalize poverty. And so that's the tricky balance that we're trying to carry, right? And to make sure cities like the one I used to govern over, Santa Ana, that hosts the county jail, we don't simply want to put people there and transfer them from other communities into that space. But I know thoughtful discussions will be able to address that. I certainly think that it is a solvable problem. When I see some of our neighboring communities like in Los Angeles and San Diego, their problems are very severe. Ours are solvable. I really do, want to stress that. I don't want to leave with a negative impression or leave this negative impression with all of you that ours aren't solvable. They're certainly large, but nothing to the comparison of what our neighbors to the south and to the north have to deal with. So I do think innovation, dealing with ways that we can use our funding properly. We have a program that we are standing up and is now being implemented, the Housing Prevention and Stabilization Program, which will fund folks who are going through unlawful detainers and eviction processes to make sure we keep people housed. So prevention, I believe, will be the key to making sure we stabilize our numbers.
Thank you so much for each of your perspectives. Looking back on 2025, I know we saw a lot of changes happening at both the federal level and the state level that have had a lot of local ripple effects. And so, Doug, Nishta, Bob, I'd love to hear from each of you. And Nishta, I'd like to start with you. What have we seen happening at federal, state level that's had a local impact?
I think a really valid question. And the word during the pandemic era was unprecedented. And the word for me and for our board in this recent year has been uncertainty. And that's the theme of what we've walked into is there's so much that changes on daily and weekly basis right now. And what makes it hard for a board to be able to weigh in a really tangible fashion is because things change overnight, which makes it hard to be strategic. Although the board hasn't shied away from doing some really intentional work, we're really happy with having launched our 3-year strategic plan, which really stayed adaptive and it's responding to the evolving needs in our community. Our lived experience compensation program got green-lighted in 2025, which I personally think is one of the cornerstones for where our work needs to be informed by, is by likes of Sana Bob and our other community lived experience and expertise members. And, we've really kept our eye on being strategic with some state funding. So while the HUD directly impacted funding ebbs and flows right now, that will tell us what is the weather like today. However, the state funding like HAP program, looking at ESG and staying creative with how we can help fill some of the gaps. One of the considerations that we've talked about in terms of advocacy has also been, and is often a feeling in our community, where does the private money, corporate dollars come help supplement? Right now, if the HUD cuts were to happen, we're thinking about $23 million annually. And although we're a really well-enriched, resourced Orange County, but there aren't many resources to replenish 23 million on an annual basis. So our eye on the ball is still to continue advocating and looking at how those federal dollars can fuel the gap and the resources for our community locally in Orange County. And I'll hand it to Doug to,
Sure. So thinking about specifically, and I think a couple of things that have been raised already, 2025 has been the year of hearing about policy changes, and 2026 will be the year of feeling those policy changes. And what two of them that have been mentioned already are worth re-mentioning. One is early on in 2025, we heard that funding for emergency housing vouchers was going to end in 2025, which it has. And for public housing authorities who oversee those vouchers, when it ends in 2025, that means they have some funding all the way through the end of 2026, but then it's over. So here in Orange County, we received through the 4 housing authorities a little over 1,000 vouchers through the Emergency Housing Voucher Program. And we were able to house over 1,000 households into permanent housing with that resource. And that was roughly 3 years ago. And at the moment, we have over 80% of those households still in housing. So cutting the funding for those particular vouchers means that those families will now need to figure out how to pay the rent. Hopefully, we will be able to assist in that. But that is funding that is no longer in our community, that is specific to housing families that were experiencing homelessness. And our system and those families worked so hard to end their homelessness. And that was a victory for us. The other piece that was alluded to.
Tell us about those families, because I think it's important for the community to know.
So,
like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, and I think when the policy was announced, folks said, well, they've been in housing for 3 years, and they've been getting their rent subsidized for 3 years. So aren't they sort of ready to no longer pay their rent? And the thing that I think you're asking is the importance to remember that in order to be eligible for those programs, you needed to have a longstanding disability and often a fixed income. Many of those households are seniors and or have a fixed income. And when we looked at the Orange County Housing Authority, looked at the average income of the families that were utilizing those vouchers or are utilizing those vouchers, their income was, I believe, average income was around $15,000. So this isn't a group of individuals. We knew disabilities are lifelong, that it's incredibly important that we help them pay their rent. The other thing is that these are families that the only intervention at the moment for most of them that we're utilizing is that voucher. They are successful in that housing with very little intervention, just this voucher. And then we have the COC program NOFO, and it's a technical piece, and Nisha mentioned it, but we're looking at significant cuts there. And I think what's important to remember is any solution to backfill those two giant cuts are solutions that include taking away resources from our system to help people that are currently experiencing homelessness. So our system is transitioning into just trying to keep people housed that we fought so long to get them housed on, and no longer, or in much fewer cases, helping the people that are currently experiencing homelessness. So we are going to see a real bottleneck in our shelters and on our streets, which we were currently experiencing. So this is compounding the issue.
Wow. Thank you so much. And just in case anybody who is watching this, we've thrown around a lot of terms, a lot of acronyms that we use. And so, Nisha, I would love if you could just do kind of a very quick kind of run through continuum of care. We mentioned, I think, about $32 million of funding that we receive on an annual basis. Both Doug and Nisha referred to changes around the continuum of care. But in case anybody kind of missed those key kind of inflection points, could you just kind of give us, walk back, and if you need to tag team, that's totally fine, of kind of what happened
And I can help too.
Yes. So essentially, every year, HUD, through Continuum of Care program grants, provides local communities with funding to help address homelessness. And each year, those programs have to apply and to get their funding renewed. Historically, that funding, which here in Orange County last year, that equaled a little over $33 million. Over close to 90% of that funding went towards supporting permanent housing. What the current administration is looking to do is change the uses of those funding, meaning that communities like ours and everyone around the nation can no longer use that funding or 90% of that funding to help keep people permanently housed. They are putting a cap on that funding to saying you can only use 30% of your funding towards permanent housing. And I think the important thing to remember is this is funding that is renewing programs. So I think a lot of people hear changes and they go, okay, well, that would affect future families. This is not the case here. This is funding when you change the use of it for funds, it is taking away from current families that are being housed towards other programs. So yeah, it gets really, really technical, and that's what I think makes it hard for us as a group at times to advocate because it's such a technical process and people get lost in the weeds, but this is critical.
And one of the pieces I think that Doug, and we all kind of see is that the cost to provide housing or house somebody once they're on the street and unsheltered is 10 times more expensive than it is to keep the person housed. So it's a really good, thoughtful way, I think effective way and efficient way to keep a person housed, to make sure that those who we've struggled to get into housing, for them to continue. Once they're out there, you start getting exposed to, bad elements, and you start spiraling, and other traumas trigger, and treatment issues and substance abuse issues. So to the extent we can keep those families that were difficult enough to find housing for, to keep them housed, and others who are struggling to maintain their housing, it's a much more cost-effective way to spend our dollars. And I think that's where the public sees that. There is a good logical sense on how we spend our money, because it costs so much to put somebody into housing, because you're dealing with so many other ancillary issues from just the shelter itself.
And if I may add, I would say cost effective and a proven success rate. Majority of the households that get supported through the work that happens continue to remain housed. And I think what the spirit of the question I heard is, yes, we're guilty of using acronyms and some terminology that seems second nature to us. So I'm going to try in 30 seconds contextualize what Doug captured. So when that 33 million gets impacted, that means 1,400 households right now, our neighbors who are being housed right now in our community will not have a home. And like for like, that would mean that we run the risk of having an even higher 2-digit increase literal homelessness in our community. And that has the ripple effect of everything that impacts our system. So the priority for the continuum of care has been to stay focused on these 1,400 households who are already being supported, and how can we help them remain housed.
And if I recall, there's at least, 400 children that make up those 1,400 households. And so we're not talking about individuals that are single. We're also talking about kids and putting kids out onto the street. So it is a critical issue that we have to continue to all collaborate on, so we don't lose the momentum that we've been building, all of us working together over the last now 6 years. I feel like we've made so much progress here in Orange County. We don't want to lose that momentum.
Thank you so much. It was 2025 brought a lot of unforeseen changes. I think I'll add just a little bit more flavor before Bob, I'm going to come to you to hear your perspective. The funding, why this has been so jarring for our community, is that the funding for the COC had been approved by Congress. It was a 2-year cycle of funding had been approved. And so what we saw happen this year was we saw an executive order being released from the White House, providing a direction for sort of a different way of addressing homelessness, a movement away from housing first, back to the treatment first model. Following that, we then kind of got wind from HUD that they might try to make some changes around how CRC funding could be utilized. That prompted a lot of advocacy efforts nationally and locally. A huge thank you to the 1,000+ people who sent letters through a letter writing campaign that we set up to advocate for that funding to remain as had been promised and allocated. And then since then, there has actually been a national lawsuit. The National Alliance to End Homelessness filed a lawsuit in December. And so we are in the midst of that. So when you heard the words uncertainty and things changing on a daily basis, that is a lot of what has been referred to. And so at the time of filming this, we are still in the midst, waiting to see how this will all unfold. But as you very clearly heard, this could impact 1,400 of our neighbors. And so it's definitely something that we need to be keeping an eye on. And as mentioned, will have really serious effects as we move forward through 2026. And so on that note, Bob, I come to you to ask, for people who are experiencing homelessness, how do you think, from your perspective, these shifts and changes that we've been talking about are kind of rippling down to them?
Well, first of all, foremost, the number one effect that comes to mind is my lived experience advisory committee has 11 members. One of them lost their funding from the emergency housing funds. They're having to deal with that. You hear all this talk about the uncertainty. Well, that uncertainty goes from the service provider and case managers and housing navigators, everybody, that trickles down right to each individual who's housed. They've been through homelessness, they've gotten housed, and now they're going to have to go through this uncertainty and stress involved with not knowing what's going to happen to them. And I'll leave it at that before I say something I can't. Although I do want to bring up, when we talk about uncertainty, I don't know how many of you have noticed what just happened in 24 hours. $2 billion in mental health services was cut and reinstated the following day. That is uncertainty.
Rex, can I just follow up too? So we talk about this change that's being proposed, a model that is focused on treatment first instead of housing first. But I think the way we all see it is that it's a simultaneous effort that is most effective. You cannot treat people if they're on the street, in a park, living on the sidewalk, unable to have consistent treatment services. So getting people into housing who do need treatment is the best approach in terms of keeping a consistent program, a consistent outreach to counseling, medical care. All of that needs to happen under a roof, just like all of us have, right? That's how come we're able to be stable, is because we can go home at night and sleep in our bed and know that the next morning we can get up and go to the doctor or go to work. So I do think that it cannot happen separate. It has to be a combined effort, treatment and housing.
I think, thank you so much for highlighting that, Vice Chair. I think one of the disservices the homelessness sector has done in the last few years was the housing first, not fully encapturing what it was. It was always housing and support services together. That is the true model of housing first. And so that was actually a beautiful segue to our next question, which is going to be coming back to you again around the Housing Finance Trust. As you look back last year, are there any key moments that you want to highlight where you were able to see the work of the trust resulting in tangible change that you can?
Yeah, so I think 2025 was really all about seeing all the progress that had been done over the prior years come to fruition. So we opened 805 units through the Orange County Housing Finance Trust. We were able to provide permanent loan conversions for 10 different projects. We saw really innovative programming where the San Juan Capistrano development with Jamboree Housing combined with the city, and they opened a city hall and a housing apartment complex right at the same location, veteran services, etc. We've seen a lot of projects that were approved and funded in 2025 that are now going to be built in 2026. Let's just keep our fingers crossed, hoping we don't lose some other funding source. But we celebrated the grand opening of Wise Place for their shelter conversion to apartments for victims of domestic violence in Santa Ana. I had the privilege of being able to use some of the budget that I had in my office to help fund that when I represented Santa Ana. Now, the Supervisor Sarmiento, who was the mayor at that time and now is representative there, we've all, that's the thing, you have to collaborate, you have to work together. While we represent different districts, we all have people who live, work, and visit in all of our districts. And then also Miraflores in Anaheim is a huge success. Another project that had been in the pipeline in the Orange County Housing Finance Trust and funded by both the Finance Trust as well as our Mental Health Service Act funding from the county. So a lot of projects underway for the following year. But opened in 2025. So that's a lot of the success that we were able to participate in.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that whistle stop tour of good news.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, and we don't want to be doom and gloom either. We know that there were some, there are challenges that have existed, continue to be pervasive, but there were some, incredible things. And one of the stats I think that to me resonated was that we had 40% fewer deaths. That had a lot to do with, unfortunately, folks, who were out on the street, use fentanyl, other drugs, and I think we saturated through campaigns both at the county level and at CalOptum. And just so you know, I know we use acronyms. CalOptum is the county's public health plan that had members almost 1 in 3 in the county. So those are folks who are seniors, those are folks who are disabled and low income. That number keeps dropping because the theme here is that the federal government is making it very difficult for people to stay housed, but it's also very difficult for people and making it very difficult for people to keep their health care in place. So things like redetermination, making it difficult to continue to qualify for Medi-Cal support, something that we're struggling with. But we know CalOptum has been really helpful on something called street medicine as well. We expanded into the city of Santa Ana. Which now has 4 cities that they provide street medicine to. But street medicine is basically an office, a physician on wheels, and goes into areas where people are unhoused and they get treated, and eventually, hopefully, establish trust with them so they can get other services as well as housing. So that was a big win. I think our office has stood up an emergency rental assistance program for people who are being separated during these deportation raids. During these, and I don't even know about calling them raids any longer. These are violations of law that we're seeing that are making people vulnerable to becoming unhoused. So that's the nexus of what we're talking about here, because these are no longer federal agencies that make us feel safe. These are federal agencies that make us feel very, very, distressed, and it causes a lot of harm. So we're trying to stand those programs up. But one last thing that we're doing is the county used to support a cold weather shelter during inclement weather. That went away because unfortunately none of our cities want to host. We're standing one up, but through a different model, which is through motel vouchers, and making sure that when there are cold weather moments, a family with children in school districts within our district can get a voucher for the next few days until the weather gets better. So those are things I think that have been innovative. We're trying to make sure that we address problems that go inside.
Doug, the Office of Care Coordination has had a busy year, having a lot going on. But for this question, I'd just love to hear from you some of the highlights, some of the progress that's been made.
Yeah. So first, I look at the number of people who got housing last year, and as we look at our statistics, over 7,300 people in Orange County last year ended their homelessness and found housing through a variety of different paths. When thinking specifically about the county and our office, there's a few things that come to mind. But they all fit under the sort of umbrella of us coordinating our approach and services better. Here in the Office of Care Coordination, over the last year, we brought the county's outreach and engagement team under our department. Our department oversees the shelters and much of other aspects of the homeless service system. So having the county's outreach team working hand in hand with our shelters, our prevention efforts, and our permanent housing efforts just make for a much more seamless approach, especially in times when we're required to be more coordinated and we see funding being decreased and limited. Other areas of coordination, I think of Proposition 36 that was passed by the voters, the state of California voters a year ago. This is a proposition that increases the penalties on arguably on people experiencing homelessness, among other things. Some of us don't necessarily agree with the direction Prop 36 is going, but what makes me proud is that the county, we've worked with our court systems, our behavioral health system, and our reentry system to ensure that everyone who's going through that process is getting a very comprehensive and coordinated treatment plan that hopefully helps ensure that they are seeing success through this process.
Thank you so much, Doug. Nishta from the COC.
So I think I touched on a few things earlier. So for a quick recap, last year has really been about critical reflection for us as a board. This is arguably the most diverse board and the multi-specialty reflected on the board composition right now. Everybody bringing in their different acumen, which has allowed us to elevate and be even more intentional in the work that goes on. One of the pieces that stood out and worthy of repeating is our lived experience compensation plan. This was a dream in the making, things that likes of three of us inherited from the boards before us, and it finally came to light this year. And we're so happy to say, and I want to piggyback on what Sana Bob had touched on, our jobs is to help offer opportunities for experience of dignity and empowerment. And we sincerely think by recognizing and acknowledging the lived expertise in our community, that's a medium to play an ally and to really help bring that voice at the center of our system. The other piece that I think our board did really well was focusing on data and making sure, there's often a stereotype of being data informed, but this is what it looks like in practice. We were able to greenlight and make live for the first time ever a live dashboard. So any one of us listening in, those present here, are ever interested to hear where are things like right now. There's an opportunity to go online and look at those live dashboards and with good explanation. The current board takes a lot of pride and intentionality on data and how that's utilized across our system. We received approximately 20 data requests in this last year, and none of them were easy to be able to just process because we're in these positions to say yes about disclosing personal information of our community members, sometimes on their behalf, and that's a responsibility we don't take lightly. So I would say the progress on our data dashboard is a big one. And then just the opportunity to have that first year of our strategic plan in the making. And I'm particularly really excited about how we bring that to life. An important quotient of that is really going back and reviewing how our coordinated entry system works. That is another technical term, and I'll dumb this down to say, across the county, we have a community queue of a head count of people who are experiencing of homelessness and are seeking services. So there is judiciousness in how that system works out. And it's a really effective program, but times have changed. It is a change management in action, and we need to go back and look at how effective that system is. So those are an anecdote of how the strategic plan will come to life in this next 3 years. And you know, I'm joined by other board members, so happy to take on any idea that I might have missed.
Well, Bob, I know that you are a Continuum of Care board member. You're the chair of the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, and you are also a member of the Commission to Address Homelessness. So you have a lot of hats on your head. But as you're looking back over the last year, where have you seen progress?
Progress has been that, especially the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, is being listened to.
Mm-hmm.
More and more. I've been on the commission for a couple of years, and over that time, individual commissioners have spoken to me, thanking me for being there. I think part of it, we just recently added a specific commissioner with lived experience to the commission. I think part of that was because their experience with me. This person who used to be homeless actually has a little bit of a brain here and there. Well, street medicine teams. There is a member on each one of those 4 street medicine teams from the Lived Experience Advisory Committee. Dr. Kelly Bruno Nelson comes to us first looking for somebody with lived experience to see if we can fill that position for each of those cities. And I hope that continues with the more of the street medicine out there.
I don't want to lose that point that Santa Bob just made, just because, you know, on the Commission to Address Homelessness, what was important is that we reviewed our bylaws and realized we need more voices like his. Right? We can have policymakers, we can have people from law enforcement, we can have other elected officials, but none of us had that acute experience to be able to say, this is what's working with the people that we have. And the experience that Bob brings and our other member of our, you know, who has lived experience on a commission can bring a unique perspective that will help guide better public policy. And that's something that I'm really proud that, you know, the commission has done, you know, in the last year. That's progress. That's making sure that we're listening to all our Orange County residents, especially those that are experiencing, you know, this problem that we're all trying to solve. And we need their voices. It can't just be us trying to speculate on what makes sense. So thank you, Bob, for bringing that up.
It is amazing to me to be in the positions I am and being listened to. Because 13 years ago, I was on the streets. I spent over 10 years on the street. And I'll tell you, at that time, I had not envisioned anything other than getting off the streets to be where I am today. That was God's plan, not mine. I would never have thought about it.
I'll just say Santa Bob is being extremely humble.
Yeah.
I have had the opportunity to serve
Is
with
she
him.
hungry? Let's see.
That too, maybe. But you know, we're so grateful for his leadership, and we hope to continue learning and championing the other members of the Lived Experience Advisory Committee. So I appreciate you highlighting that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to challenge you all. We're moving to our lightning round. And so you only have 60 seconds for your response. So good luck. Okay. Supervisor Foley, I'm coming to you first. What is the difference between affordable housing and permanent support housing?
Well, this is easy. I can say that pretty quickly. Affordable housing is housing that accommodates anyone who has income of less than $95,000 a year. Permanent supportive housing is housing that, like we talked about, wraparound services, treatment, employment services, counseling, maybe it's daycare. It has a lot of services attached to the permanent supportive housing. Affordable housing is not necessarily permanent supportive housing.
Thank you so much. Supervisor Sarmiento, you're up next. Where are the latest cold weather shelter updates, and where can someone find the most up-to-date information?
Well, they can certainly reach our office for that because we have a program called the WARM program that I referenced. And we're working with all 5 school districts in our district to make sure they identify the McKinney-Vento families, those that are, have families that are sleeping in their vehicles, sleeping on the street. And those are our priority to make sure that during, we live in a beautiful climate, but we do experience rain, cold, and severe conditions that could impact a person's ability to learn. So we're really grateful that the school districts have worked with us to make sure that they can identify families and partner with us. And now we can provide not just the motel voucher, but also services and access to information that we can hopefully stabilize. And that's the important part of this. It's not just housing a person for a few nights, it's stabilizing them so you can find a long-term solution so people are off the street.
Thank you. Santa Bob, has there been forward momentum on helping seniors who are on a fixed income remain housed?
Yes. The positive on that are that more and more cities are joining in on putting in rent control, putting in subsidies for seniors for their rent or their mortgage. They're understanding that seniors are having a very difficult time out there. But unfortunately, we're up against the prediction that Dr. Dennis Culhane, from the University of Pennsylvania, warned us, 2017, 2019, that the homeless population was going to triple by 2030. Just this month, he said, that prediction is being met or slightly exceeded. We have to keep on doing more for the seniors because there are more and more seniors.
Doug, I'm coming to you next. How are the behavioral health and homeless services working together?
Yeah, so funding for behavioral health services has changed through the Behavioral Health Services Act here in the state of California. And just the really quick answer is that our healthcare agency, as the overseer of the Behavioral Health Services Act funding, is required and oversees a whole bunch of community meetings and a community planning process to ensure that the funding we get related to behavioral health services not only meets the needs for our community at large, but a big focus of that is funding that's focused on providing behavioral health services to people experiencing homelessness.
Thank you. Supervisor Foley, Vice Chair Foley, I apologize. What are alternative funding options with lower federal funding available?
Well, that's about a 2-hour conversation. But so I'll just hit some high points. So yesterday we heard some good news. The housing bond made it out of committee. It's moving forward towards the governor's desk, and we expect that the housing bond will be on the November ballot. That will provide some funding opportunities. It also takes into consideration transitional age use, otherwise known as TAY housing, and provides funding for that. Student housing, college student housing. This is an area that no one really ever talks about, but as a person who grew up in a family where we were living on people's couches, in my grandmother's garage, in a motorhome, in a trailer, I know that there's a lot of people who are unhoused by our definition of unhoused, but are living somewhere under a roof, but it's just not stable housing. So this housing bond, I think, will help that. Of course, cities can partner with us at the county, at the Housing Finance Trust, at the Continuum of Care to better be a partner, waive the development permit fees, provide land. I mean, those are ways that the cities can help us to reduce the cost of housing. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to try to raise money into the Housing Finance Trust. We're hiring a consultant, a fundraiser to actually do that work for us to raise those private dollars into the Housing Finance Trust. And then finally, I'll talk about our office supported with some grant funding, the work that United Way is doing with the Affordable Housing Access Platform, which will be a website where people can go and have access and look at what is available in the community. So these are all things that we can do because we can't just like say, oh, well, we lost our federal funding. I guess we just close up shop. That's not an option.
Thank you. I know that was a challenge to attempt in 60 seconds.
Yeah, that's not
Wow. Supervisor Sarmiento, our next question is, what impact does ticketing unhoused people have when there isn't housing available?
And I really want to add on to that, what the supervisor started talking about. But let me just say on the question you just asked about, citing and ticketing and arresting folks who are either, on the street or have encampments. It's a really difficult challenge to thread that needle to make sure that you are citing the right people, right? And making sure that they're not simply just being transferred from the street to the county jail. They'll be let out in 2 or 3 days, and then they're out in the same condition that they were, just someplace else, right? So that's the real challenge, because once they're cited, you have a record, and it makes it difficult for you to get housing, for you to get employment. So it's just a vicious cycle of putting somebody in the correctional system. So that is really difficult. But really, the math is really what we're talking about is from the last point in time count, we had over 7,000 folks that were identified as unsheltered or sheltered. We only have close to 3,000 beds throughout the county. The calculus just doesn't work. And that's what we're trying to solve, is how do we do that? And so just to really quickly tack on to what the supervisor was talking about with respect to the cost of housing, we did a conference last year on something called small scale housing, tiny homes, right? It costs 1 unit of sort of brick and mortar housing about $700,000 to $800,000 to construct. Small scale housing costs about $60,000 to $100,000, and you can stand it up in less than 6 months. So we need to start looking at innovative ways to do this. There's a lot of interest. I know San Diego School District has some property that we're identifying to maybe do a pilot program. So we're real excited. We've got to look at other solutions, not just the same old path, because that hasn't gotten us as far as we'd like.
So more housing, yes.
and at all levels, right? Whether it's small scale, whether it's permanent, supportive, you can do both in tandem.
So Nish, to close out our lightning round of questions here. What is happening? We heard earlier about emergency housing vouchers. What is happening right now, kind of with our PHAs around PHAs?
A housing voucher is kind of like a golden ticket. And so if you've been in this coordinated entry system and have had experienced chronic homelessness and a known disability, in all intents and purposes, you can qualify to receive this voucher, which is financially supported and backed for up to 3 decades or more through the federal government. And so a regular format of that is a housing choice voucher, but a magic happened around the pandemic era. We got emergency housing vouchers, which was about 1,000 plus for our community. Our community was successful in leasing up all of them, which is a huge shout out to the providers involved, to the housing authorities. We have 4 housing authorities in Orange County. So quick shout out to where things are now is most recently we heard at the COC board meeting that Orange County Housing Authority has come up with a really sharp strategic plan of absorbing 100 of these emergency housing vouchers to help absorb them into a regular voucher, which means 100 of those households will not be losing housing, even with the federal cuts. And so that's the kind of creative thinking and, just really piggybacking on what Vice Chair Foley said is we have to get creative. We have to think differently to have a different outcome. And so vouchers was a really good example of that. And the COC board is using that as a guiding tool for as we go into these anticipated cuts from the HUD funding that we receive.
Thank you so much. And I think I'll just add on to that to say that each public housing authority who had those awards of those emergency housing vouchers are working really diligently to try to make sure that as few people as possible will lose their housing because of that. So the onus right now, sadly, is at the local level for those entities that have housing authorities to really work with those households to help make sure that they can retain their housing.
Can I add one thing to that? Because, when I joined the board, we were using only 4% of our housing vouchers for what's called project-based vouchers. That means this is a housing voucher that is attached to an affordable housing development, and it's for 55 years at that rate. And
So now we're up to 20% of our housing vouchers being used for project-based vouchers. That's creating more capacity in the system longer. It's not requiring people to have to go find a landlord to accept their housing voucher. And I think we have to do more of that as we build more housing into the community.
That is a good segue as we are moving into our kind of final part of our panel discussion right now, as we're looking forward to the next year. So Vice Chair Foley, as you're looking at 2026, what is the single most important next step that we must take to keep progress moving forward?
We have to cut the bureaucratic red tape. And that's not just like a phrase, it's actually real. It shouldn't take 7 years for a development to get approved through a city and to then get built. In those 7 years, people are dying because they're homeless. Seniors are being moved out of their community, out of their network. We have to streamline the government approval process so that we can build more housing. We have to build housing near job centers. This housing, the idea of building housing near job centers actually reduces traffic, reduces the impacts on the quality of life for the residents. It actually is a good investment because the return on our investment is when you invest in the training for employees who stay in the job that you trained them for, means they're not moving to Corona or San Bernardino because they can afford to live here in Orange County. So build more housing closer to job centers and do it faster without all the bureaucratic red tape. And that includes, respectfully, my colleagues on city council, right? We can't add things when you're sitting on the dais at the time of approval. The time to do that is during the planning process. Be more effective and efficient.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Sarmiento. As you're thinking about the next year for our community and perhaps also a little of the commission, I know you'll be changing roles, but perhaps some of your hopes for the commission over the next year, what's a really critical step that we need to make sure we take?
Yeah, and I think we've already kind of started that last year, and it really is to focus in on prevention, which is one of the 4 pillars at the commission. Again, just to sort of repeat what was mentioned earlier, as we're spending much more scarce dollars, we won't have the monies that we've had in the past. We have to be really careful how we scrutinize those dollars and make sure that there's a return. And I think making sure people are housed and looking at ways to, as you know, I think we've spoken with Doug, there's a front door and a back door to homelessness. Our front door has been increasing because more people are becoming unhoused. To the extent we can stabilize that and prevent people from falling into homelessness, it is going to help us to make sure we find resources for those that are ready to leave. Right now, 80% of our folks in congregate sheltered housing are ready for housing. They've already, stayed in a sheltered setting. Unfortunately, only 12% of them are able to find that housing, and because of the lack of availability and lack of inventory. So that's where I think, prevention is going to be really critical to make sure we don't continue increasing our numbers and keep those people housed. And again, it's a simple affordability problem. It is just very challenging to live in this county. This is probably, again, we have so many things that draw people to this county. Many of us who grew up here and call it home, suffer from the fact that maybe our kids won't be able to live here and afford to live here. So the folks who are housing compromised, food compromised, they're being pressured by healthcare costs that are increasing. It is very difficult to make sure that they are going to continue to live here. So there are, incredible pressures on people these days that we just see. And it's not just a housing solution. It is stabilizing. It is making sure that we have, workforce training, that we have, financial literacy, we have, mental health and trauma support. It is all of the above because, housing somebody, giving them, funding to stay housed maybe for, a month or, a couple of months, that's not going to solve the problem long term. We'll see them back on the street again.
Thank you. Doug, this year has started with a flurry. As you look out over 2026, what's an important next step for the county in terms of helping to strengthen care coordination?
Yeah, I think it's really simple, and we've been talking about it. It's related to funding. the vice chair mentioned it earlier, we've created a really strong system of care here in Orange County. We've created it, I think, through the leadership at the county, but also through partnership with all 34 cities and our nonprofit groups. We found solutions. Our system works. It might not be flawless and perfect, but it works. It needs the funding in order to support it. I think, the layer behind the funding is also the shift we've seen in policy and messaging around how to solve homelessness has changed, especially at the federal level. We learned solutions, and we have proven solutions here in our communities, in many communities, that have helped end people's homelessness. And we're seeing policies that are shifting away from those proven solutions. Because those policies are shifting away from those proven solutions, so is the funding. So for us, it is really all about ensuring that we have the funding to support the system that we know already works.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight and critical point that you're making there. Nishta, from the COC vantage point, what's the most urgent next step to make sure that we have progress moving forward?
Support the experts in our community who do this work well, know what the best practices are, instead of spending the time to reinvent the wheel. A lot of those are represented in this room here, and I'm sure listening in. We know what pays off. Nonprofits are experts at maximizing and optimizing limited resources. So this is our golden hour, right? This is what we're good at. And so trust in that power and in our own community. For the COC board, is essentially a bunch of doers who are good at helping resolve housing problems and finding solutions. I think what we need to continue to get better at is talking about the volume and the quality of work that we undertake. There is so much that goes on in a year. So for next year, focus will be on best practices like homeless prevention and partnering with the Commission to address homelessness on it, focusing on building more housing. We attempted that last year, and let's bring that to life. And just really making sure that we're being reflective and honoring the experiences of people as they're navigating this already very strained system.
Thank you. Senator Bob, I come to you. From your perspective, what are the next most important steps to make sure the system, so that we can expand housing, but also build trust, accountability, and dignity into how decisions are made?
I think the best thing that needs to be done is to take one or two examples, whether it be the tiny homes for the small scale housing units, or veteran homelessness, and get everybody focused on it. The county, the churches, the general public, and get it done. Prove that we can be successful. Many other communities have ended veteran homelessness. It's been done. It can be done. The small scale housing units, get that pilot program, prove that it can be successful, and prove that it can be a financial benefit to us, and make sure we let everybody in the county know that it can be done.
Listen to Santa Bob.
Yeah.
I think after seeing this, the Orange County Conditions of Children's report, a lot of those data and findings that they show, there are some communities that are suffering at higher incomes, right? I know the Latino families here in Orange County tend to have the highest condition of homelessness and food insecurity, lack of health care. So I think for us, it's partnering with those districts early on. First Five is an example, right? First Five talks, and does public policy on children who are from that 0 to 5 period, sort of prenatal care and working with families and mothers. So I think it's better public policy and better relationships. Dr. Stephen Bean, who's the new director at OC Department of Ed, has had a really open door policy with our office when it comes to trying to figure out how we can get information from the county to the school districts, right? And so right now, the great thing is that the school districts are completely open to making sure that the county is able to be a partner with them. Again, not just on the housing piece that I described with respect to small scale housing, but also just trying to identify those families that are compromised right now. Because, again, the McKinney-Vento, families, that's a good, metric to show, where are these families? And these are the families, again, that are, they're maybe one paycheck away. Maybe they're living in vehicles. Maybe they're, couch surfing. Maybe they're going from motel to hotel. But it's finding them and trying to stabilize those families. And so we have our hands full because we know that the numbers are going in the wrong direction on this one. So we're hoping that all of us can work together as a collaborative.
Well, and I would say to add to that, a lot of the affordable housing developments that we've seen over the last, say, 6 years, they have been focused on individuals, not families. I think we need to build more 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units that are affordable because we're seeing an increase in the number of families that are falling into homelessness. So that's one area. Also, just in general, we have to reduce the cost for families. All of what we're talking about really boils down to you have this much money coming in and this much money going out. Okay, so how do we reduce the costs to families so that they can afford to pay the rent and keep their health care, pay for their groceries, make sure that the utilities are paid, and make sure that the kids especially have access to do activities. I personally feel that funding activities, even though it's not about homelessness per se, funding activities so that kids have free activities in the community, music classes, dance classes, sports, creative outlets, public libraries. That's all critical because that's how those kids have a sanctuary to go to so that they can live their best lives. Later, you can't pick your parents, so you have to be able to develop yourself as a young person. I can speak to that personally. If I didn't have dance class, if I didn't have student newspaper or cheerleading to help me to develop as a young woman, I would not have continued on. I would have thought, oh, I'm just stuck here in poverty. I can't go anywhere. So I feel like you have to do it all.
Thank you for your leadership, your insight, and your commitment to this work. Thank you to everybody in the audience today for joining us, for your dedication to understanding our community's needs more deeply, so that we can work to address homelessness for our neighbors. And as we look ahead to the new year, we know that housing and homelessness landscape is going to continue to evolve. Staying informed and engaged is essential as our community works to advance housing solutions for all of Orange County. To stay connected to our work, we invite you to join us for our upcoming Homelessness 101 classes, our Introduction to Advocacy classes as well. These will help take the conversation even further and empower you to actively participate in local advocacy efforts across Orange County, also the state of California, and nationally as well. You can follow along on social media for real-time updates, resources, and additional ways to stay engaged with the work. Links are being shared right now in the chat, and they'll be emailed to everybody who registered as well. Thank you for being a part of this conversation, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.